PhD in German studies and PhD in international studies. Welcome to this podcast, David Hughes.
Thank you, Fleming. It's nice to be back with you.
We are going to discuss an issue which I think is a little bit energy consuming to discuss because it usually doesn't land well with people when you start criticizing other people that apparently are also doing good work in enlightening people as to what is going on in the world today. However, I think it's important we do this, and in particular because the framework that you have crafted, which I think is a genius way of explaining what I've tried to explain to many people, has been put under criticism, and we're also going to discuss why, and in particular some of these actors that this kind of framework actually helps to point out. If that's okay with you.
Yeah, and I mean I should make clear from the outset, I don't take any pleasure in doing this kind of work. I don't particularly want to do this kind of work. I've been trying to get back to writing volume 2 of my COVID book, but circumstances are what they are. And when people write hit pieces against you, when you become aware of the scale of infiltration of Camp 2, we'll come back to the 3 camps later, I think there is an intellectual and moral responsibility to actually say what you're seeing and alert the public to it, because it's certainly not the case that anybody who is speaking out against power and authority is automatically on your side. That's a very crude dichotomy. So yeah, I mean, I do hope to draw a line under this kind of work I've been doing in 2026 as soon as possible. But at the same time, as you say, it is important that we do look openly and honestly at what is going on.
So we'll look at Reiner Fuellmich, we'll look at the 3 camps of awareness framework, and we'll also look at the UK column and the discussion or the critique that has been on the 3 camps of awareness, and in particular that critique has been raised by Jerm Warfare or Jerem, and there's some points that he brings up that we'll come back to. But first of all, Reiner Fuellmich is really someone that everybody who was so-called awake during the COVID era knew who he was, because he was someone from the, let's say, narrative world. He had been apparently a lawyer who had won a case against a big German car manufacturer, Volkswagen, and he took on this initiative to settle the score during COVID. And I think we were many that, really enjoyed some of the work that he did. And then, for my own sake, it sort of didn't really lead anywhere, so I've sort of left the case. And then when I saw what you wrote on Fuellmich, then I sort of, yeah, well, there you go, again, because this is not the first time. So for people who don't know actually what you have written, what is the main points of critique against Reiner Fuellmich being an activist, freedom and libertarian activist?
Well, I wrote a 4-part series on Fuellmich, not because I had set out to do so, but because somebody had accidentally forwarded me the legal judgment against him. And of course, we're all curious about the Corona Investigative Committee and what really went on there. So I was curious to read the legal judgment against him, which finds him guilty of embezzling 700,000 euros. And I read it with an open mind, but in my opinion, there is sufficient hard evidence in there, for example, relating to flows of money and what money was spent on and used for, communications from Fuellmich himself to other members of the committee, statements that he himself made in court. I mean, this is all hard evidence that you can look at. And when you pieced it all together, I was persuaded that there was sufficient evidence in that judgment to indicate that he was clearly guilty, in fact, of embezzlement. And I was quite shocked by that. And the first two parts of my series go through the judgment, and they explain my reasoning for why I find the judgment credible. Now, already at that point, people started writing to me saying, well, you don't understand the German legal system. It's all completely corrupt. He's been persecuted. He's been hung out to dry. He's been kidnapped. He's been abducted. He's been tortured, blah, 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 blah. And this is a narrative which Fuellmich himself sowed during his very prolonged 5-month-long closing statements in court. And so they're simply repeating a narrative. And again, when you read the legal documentation, there are many, many reasons to question that narrative. Nevertheless, even if one were to accept that the entire legal process had been one giant stitch-up, which I don't think it was, even if you were to accept that, there are then parts 3 and 4 of my series which move away from the legal judgment and look at Fuellmich's other work historically. And there are many, many troubling aspects to this. For example, in part 3, I note the following claim that Reiner Fuellmich made in 2020 as he was announcing himself on the scene as this big shot lawyer who was going to get justice for the injustices of the COVID era. And he said, quote, "I have been practicing law primarily as a trial lawyer against fraudulent corporations such as Deutsche Bank, formerly one of the world's largest and most respected banks, today one of the most toxic criminal organizations in the world, Volkswagen, one of the world's largest and most respected car manufacturers, today notorious for its giant diesel Ford, and Kuehne and Nagel, the world's largest shipping company. We're suing them in a multi-million-dollar bribery case." So in other words, he's announcing his credentials there and reasons for why we should trust him to carry out this amazing kind of large lawsuit on behalf of many, many people who have been harmed. And everybody bought into that. And in that part 3 of my series, I go through probably at least a dozen alternative media commentators who repeat virtually word for word, Reiner Fuellmich took down Volkswagen and Deutsche Bank. You know, he was this major international successful trial lawyer, etc. And I ask, is any of it actually true? Did he actually do that? Where's the evidence? And I went looking for evidence and I couldn't find any. And I found that rather troubling. You can find that he was involved with a few clients, but he wasn't a prosecutor. He wasn't a trial lawyer in these cases. He certainly wasn't a linchpin in the legal defeats that these major corporations faced. Nothing of the kind. And I did what I thought was the intellectually honest thing to say, well, okay, I may be wrong. If I am, prove me wrong. Because it should be fairly easy for his supporters to find what I was unable to find, i.e. evidence that those claims were true. Well, here we are about 2 months later. I've received a volley of abuse from dozens of his supporters, but I haven't received any hard evidence that he was who he claimed to be. And nevertheless, some of his supporters have pressed on with this. There's a guy called Paul Charles Gregory, who's taken offense at what I've written. And he tried telling me, oh, no, you're wrong. Look at X, Y, and Z. It proves that that Fuellmich was indeed who he said. And so I looked at the sources that Gregory cited, and they proved nothing of the kind. And meanwhile, Gregory was going behind my back, in fact, emailing various people saying that I was deceptive and devious for my attacks on Fuellmich. No, I'd say if anything is deceptive and devious here, it's going behind my back and spreading this kind of malicious gossip about me when I've actually been public, open, and evidence-based. The point being, to this day, none of his supporters have actually provided any hard evidence that Fuellmich was who he claimed to be at the start of the COVID era. Now, if that's the case, straight away, why should we trust him? Okay, straight away, there is cause for suspicion there. And that's just the beginning of it. You can then dig back into his past and some of the work he was doing back in the 1990s, for example. There was a critical documentary on German television, which involved him. The consumer protection guy, Heinz Gerlach, I think his name was, who was criticizing Fuellmich, talked about the way he had this knack of creating spectacles, American style, almost like a grand kind of entertainment style, so that people would kind of buy in, he'd be able to take their money. But what did he actually deliver? Very little. This was being said publicly about Fuellmich in the 1990s. So then you fast forward to COVID and you look at, for example, his transnational class action lawsuit that he promised. This is separate from the work of the Corona Investigative Committee, but of course he'd been catapulted to public stardom by the committee. And he was promising entrepreneurs in Germany who had been harmed by the COVID measures that he would be able to conduct a lawsuit on their behalf using the Anglo-American legal system to get justice in Germany, which is, I mean, it's ridiculous on its face, but he made this promise. And of course, people at the time were hurting and were desperate. And one source which I cite suggests that he had raised at least 1.44 million euros from clients wanting to be part of his promised lawsuit, paying 800 euros plus VAT a time, so 1,000 euros each, just to have any kind of involvement in it. Now, he hadn't actually promised that he'd go to court. He hadn't promised that he would win. This was just to be part of his scheme. And having taken this money, immediately, the financial records show he put at least 500,000 euros of it into his mortgage because the bank had cancelled his mortgage, which again raises recent questions. Why would the bank do that? How financially healthy was Fuellmich at the start of 2020? Another source, which has been drawn to my attention, indicates that Fuellmich's law firm was 92,000 euros in debt at the start of 2020. So far from being the successful big shot international lawyer, there are reasons here to question his finances. So he takes this money. I've been told, although I can't verify, that he took an additional 100,000 euros of that money for himself and paid an accountant another 100,000 euros. So that's pretty much half of all of that money gone already. So is there actually enough money left to conduct the lawsuit? He then made promises that he had sent money to, he claimed publicly that he'd sent money to Michael Swinson in Canada, who was also looking to take legal action against the COVID measures. Well, I wrote to Swinson and he said that's not true. Fuellmich did no such thing. He was just making these things up. And of course, that transnational class action lawsuit didn't materialize. Now, I'm going to pause for a moment to give you a chance to come back in, but be assured that this is just a small portion of what I uncovered when looking into Reiner Fuellmich.
Yeah, I have seen the videos or the interviews you have done on this. I've also read your articles. It's very hard to actually come back with anything that remotely places reasonable doubt that he is not really a criminal or a fraud who's trying to take people's money instead of really helping the issue.
Unfortunately, I mean, and again, I just want to reiterate, I did not go into this work on Fuellmich with any kind of agenda or any kind of prejudice or preconception. I was entirely open-minded. If it had have worked out the other way, that everything is as his supporters say, I would have been quite happy to have taken their side. But that's not what I found. I found all kinds of other bizarre irregularities. And again, just coming back to the Corona Investigative Committee, it's a point of fact that he took 700,000 euros and put them into his wife's account and his own account, and then spent them exclusively on private uses such as garden design, paying divorce costs, I think, from a previous marriage, going to restaurants, or you name it. This money wasn't being responsibly held for the Corona Investigative Committee as he claimed. It wasn't available to the committee at the drop of a hat in the event that the committee wanted it. And those were the terms, theoretically, on which this money had been, quote unquote, lent. Indeed, they called it a loan, but it wasn't really a loan. There was no interest, and it wasn't about repaying on a particular date. It was about keeping the money liquid and available at any time, which Fuellmich did not do. And all of this is very, very clear from the evidence in the court documents. One interesting kind of thought experiment that the judgment poses is, what happens if Reiner Fuellmich would have become seriously ill, incapacitated, or deceased? How then would the committee have got its money back? And the answer is it couldn't legally. It couldn't have got its money back. Why? Because there were no securities in place. He didn't back this with anything legally, which is really suspicious. There was some talk about tying it to his wife's ranch in California, but that never actually happened. And meanwhile, it's very clear that he was encouraging Viviana Fischer to also take some money for herself, and she did indeed take 100,000 euros. And his own communications showed that he was trying to encourage her also to spend it on her own private uses. And the judgment suggests that the reason for this is that the two of them were kind of countersigning each other's withdrawals. He didn't tell the other two members of the committee, Justus Hoffmann and Antonia Fischer, about what was going on. It was all a secret. And once he'd got Viviana Fischer to buy in to this kind of private usage, then there would be no way that she would call him out for it if she herself were doing it. All of these communications are there. You can read them for yourself. So again, this is really troubling stuff. Then there was the gold. I think it was 975,000 euros of gold, which again was bought by the committee with a view to supposedly keeping it safe from state seizure. Well, Fuellmich placed the gold in the houses of friends of his. I mean, this is an incredibly informal arrangement. And Viviana Fischer actually intervened when she found out what was going on and made sure that the gold was moved to a proper gold storage unit in Berlin. Now, I mean, Fuellmich hadn't done anything illegal with the gold. But the point is, in light of everything else, the gold has since doubled in value to approximately 2 million euros. What would have happened to the gold if it had just been sitting around in his friends' houses? We don't know. Then there is the peculiar house sale. I mean, this again is bizarre. So Fuellmich told the court that the fact that this money was being spent on kind of private uses wasn't a problem, because he could sell his house at any time, which was worth approximately 1.3 million euros, and get the money that way. However, when it came to the house sale, it turned out that he couldn't actually sell the house straightforwardly, because there were encumbrances on it. And those encumbrances had to do with the €500,000 that I mentioned earlier with respect to his mortgage. And legally speaking, that €500,000 had been signed over to him by his fellow lawyer, Marcel Templin. And the two of them were running this class action lawsuit scam together. So bear with me on this. So the house can't be sold in a usual straightforward way. And so Templine tells the buyers, well, I'll sell the house to you directly if you give me most of the money. So despite the fact he was responsible for €500,000 in relation to Fuellmich's house, he managed to walk away. Now, I forget the exact figure. It was approximately, I think, €1.1 million went directly to Marcel Templine, Fuellmich's partner in a different scam, went straight to Templine and not to the Corona Investigative Committee. The remaining money, which was less than €200,000, should have gone to the committee. But instead, I think Fuellmich put it back in his wife's account again. So at no point did he indicate any willingness to return the money to the committee in practice. So this is astonishing. I mean, when you start adding up the sums of money involved, I was totting it all up, and I think it comes to about €3.54 million in total, something like this. It's utterly remarkable. And then there was the Crimes Against Humanity tour, which Fuellmich embarked on in 2022 with Richard Fleming, Judy Mikovits, and Patrick Wood. And I think they had 9 tour dates, large venues across the United States in the calendar. Again, kind of a big money-making scheme, it looks like, kind of profiting off the backs of people suffering. They were charging quite substantial prices for tickets, over $100. I reckon, a kind of back of an envelope calculation, just looking at some of the venues and their capacity, that if they'd have sold out these venues, they probably would have made about $2 million on this tour. So, okay, there's overheads and travel and marketing and all the rest, but it's still a very substantial amount of money. In the end, the tour fell flat. It was cancelled early. But when it was cancelled, there was a big falling out between Richard Fleming on the one hand and the other 3 on the other hand. And Fleming had some very interesting remarks to make about Fuellmich. He said that Fuellmich wasn't serious about taking legal action internationally, that his case was obviously not watertight and wouldn't stand up in a court of law, and that he was offered the opportunity to lead an international legal action that Fleming was trying to put together and turned it down. And then he was offered the opportunity to be the lead lawyer, allegedly, on this legal action, which would have involved very little work on his part, because others would be doing it for him. And again, he turned it down. So Fleming's view back in 2022 was that Fuellmich wasn't actually serious about using the legal system to get justice for the crimes of the COVID era. And then you might also look at other bizarre things that Fuellmich did in that regard. For example, there was some talk about trying to appeal to the Maori justice system. I mean, that was very peculiar. And then there was something about possibly trying to use the Canadian justice system, was it? Or to try and sue the Queen of England or things like this. Just utterly bizarre proposals, a bit like using the Anglo-American legal system to get justice in Germany. None of it made any sense. But nevertheless, people fell for it. People were willing to buy into it because they were hurt and they were desperate and they were willing to send money to try and push back against the tyranny. It's gruesome.
And at this point in time, people are still willing. I know it's more than 2 months now since you made these, or the beginning of these 4 articles, and you have been very thorough in documenting all the points you're making. And still, I try to keep away from Facebook, but now and then, when I'm in there, I can see that it's gathering a lot of tension, the Fuellmich case, and I'm not sure if they're still collecting money from people, but it's definitely very evident that people haven't understood that they're being taken for a ride here, and that's unfortunately a thing that goes on not only in the Fuellmich case, but all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if he might be part of an intelligence operation at this point, because there's something abnormal about, for example, if you go onto Twitter at any moment during the day or night, and you put his name in, all you'll find is just this never-ending torrent of support. I mean, it's obviously not natural or spontaneous. It's obviously manufactured. That's really suspicious. If you go onto Wikipedia, which is known to be a platform controlled by the intelligence agencies, none of this controversy really, there may be a line on it or something, oh, he was found guilty, but his page is very, very short. It's very, very bland. It says almost nothing about him, which I find really suspicious, because again, if it was genuinely a kind of open source, everybody can contribute to it, it would be massive. There'd be loads of stuff on there, and there isn't. The response, the kind of it feels almost like a coordinated level of hate that I've received as a result of just pointing to evidence. Again, that to me feels like flack in the kind of propaganda sense, that thou shalt not go here, because if you do, you're going to have to put up with all of this. Well, I've stood my ground. And every time people kind of try writing these pieces against me, I just reply to them. Just 2 days ago, I had an email basically trying to make me feel stupid, that I don't understand the German legal system properly. Allegedly, it's from a guy, or maybe a girl, I don't know, called Ali Watson. Your attacks on Fuellmich and anyone who attempts to defend him seem to stem from a fundamental misunderstanding of the German legal system. And then this short essay follows in the email. So I read it, I processed it, and my reply to him was, so you still don't have any evidence that Fuellmich was who he claimed to be? And this Ali Watson character hasn't got back to me yet. And it's always this way, always, that you get abuse and criticism and ad hominem and smears, and never any evidence. Yeah. So it really doesn't stand up. I mean, you mentioned the way the money keeps flowing, and this is another important aspect to this. Free Reiner Fuellmich has become a hashtag and a brand name, and it's still taking money. There's more than one crowdfunder that you can give money to, ostensibly in support of Reiner Fuellmich and his wife Inka Fuellmich. There's been a movie, a short film, an hour-long film made, on Free Reiner Fuellmich, and they've gathered dozens of kind of old media talking heads, all kind of speaking in support of Fuellmich. And again, I'm looking at something like that, and I'm thinking that smacks of propaganda. I mean, something like that, and what? None of it seems natural. It all seems manufactured, and that's before we get on to the Scientology links, which Uwe Alschner exposed. And again, this goes all the way back to the 1990s. And a well-known researcher at the time by the name of Renata Hartwig accused Reiner Fuellmich of, quote, doing the dirty work for Scientology. In other words, spreading malicious gossip and so on. This was back in the 1990s. And Fuellmich put out a statement in 2021 addressing Alschner's concerns. And he said, "Oh, the ZDF documentary in which all of this was broadcast was later banned." But what his supporters don't concede is that when you actually look at the legal ruling on this, as Alschner did, the court was very clear actually that the parts relating to Scientology stood. They were okay. And his supporters claimed that it is defamatory to link Fuellmich to Scientology. Well, I mean, the simple fact is he's a lawyer, and if it were truly defamatory, he would have sued Renata Hartwig. He would have sued Uwe Alschner. He's never tried suing anybody for making links to Scientology. Now, why is Scientology significant? Because it is known to have close ties to US intelligence, okay, particularly through the US Office of Naval Intelligence. And again, we have to ask questions about Reiner Fuellmich's perfect American accent. He's said that he went to school in Michigan. We don't know why. We don't know exactly what the nature of his ties are to the United States, but we know he's, perfectly bilingual. He got his bar qualification in 1993 in California. So there's that link as well. But when you start putting it all together, Alshner makes the suggestion that perhaps there is an intelligence link there. And Alshner's view on this was that it's about what he called, I think he called it demoralizing or creating depression about fallen angels, something like this. In other words, demoralizing the opposition. That it can be perhaps part of a plan to actually get everybody to put their hopes into this savior figure who then lets them down. And then, of course, where is the opposition left at that point? Just demoralized. Oh my God, I thought the Corona Committee was doing this amazing work. And now it turns out that, look at the latest. Justus Hoffmann and Antonia Fischer are suing Viviana Fischer for 4.5 million euros. So all of that money hasn't actually gone anywhere constructive or in the public interest. Yes, they produced some very good, professionally produced kind of real-time interviews with international experts. Yeah, great. But I mean, many people have done good interviews down the years. But when we're talking millions of euros, you'd expect a bit more than that. And for it now just to be them all suing each other, trying to get their hands on the money. So it's really disappointing how it's turned out. And many people are gutted, and rightly so. But the question that all raises was that the plan in the first place? We don't know. But given the mountain of evidence relating to all of this, you have to ask questions. Just one final thing before I stop, Fleming. Fuellmich was part of an organization called Financial Turnaround. And again, it's another one of these kind of consumer protection type organizations. Well, it turns out that this organization was taking money from George Soros's Open Society Foundation, and it was kind of funneled through the Heinrich Böll Foundation before it reached Financial Turnaround. Well, this was pointed out when Fuellmich was running for political leadership of a new German party called Die Basis, I think in 2021. And it was said, well, this is troublesome because Fuellmich had been openly critical of George Soros, even blaming him for some of the COVID fiasco in 2020. And then these ties were pointed out to Soros's Open Society Foundation. So what was Fuellmich's response at that point? Well, rather than substantively addressing the criticism, he simply had his name removed from the list of founders of Financial Turnaround, which again looks suspicious. So everything about him looks suspicious. And you have to be open, you have to be honest about this and just recognize it for what it is. So yes, there's an appeal outstanding. Maybe the judgment will be quashed, who knows? But for the time being, seen in the round, I think there are many, many reasons here for anyone with their head screwed on to be asking some pretty serious questions.
I definitely have one question or one advice to pass on, because when you mentioned the Scientology links, that's also what I saw here in Denmark. Organizing demonstrations, we got a ton of resistance, a ton of look over here and attacks and stuff like that. And there were Scientology involved in it. Usually it was former Scientology people who are maybe even more organized than Scientology itself in this field of operation. That also explains some of the astroturfing that is done. That means that Reiner Fuellmich gets all the propped up what's it called, the likes and expose. He gets propagated throughout the medias, and that is groups like Scientology very involved in my opinion. That's what I've seen here in Denmark. Anyway, let's move on to how actually to call out all this BS, because there's so much BS in this, and here's where you made a framework which I thought was, speaking on the base of what we just discussed, thought was very helpful, which you call the 3 camps of awareness framework. And could you just very briefly explain what this is, and then we'll move on to this this critique or this backlash that this framework has raised recently?
Yeah, sure.
And before you do that, David, can I actually ask you to maybe tilt your camera up a little bit? So, yeah, like that. Yeah, not too much, not too much. And a little bit down again, please.
How's that?
A little bit more.
Okay.
More. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, so the 3 camps of awareness. Camp 1 is for the normies. Unfortunately, most of society. They believe what the politicians and the mainstream media tell them. They lack critical thinking. They have not been trained to understand that they are imbibing propaganda when they read their daily newspapers and watch their BBC, etc. And they fundamentally swallow what they've been told, and their entire worldview is determined accordingly. Camp 2 is for those who have doubts about Camp 1, and they realize that at some basic level they have been lied to. For example, it doesn't take a genius to work out that 2 planes did not bring down 3 towers in Lower Manhattan. And once they start kind of tugging on the threads of, of those very simple empirical facts, they enter a world of, it's a difficult process, because you realize at that point that you have been deceived by propaganda for your entire life, including about the most serious events. You realize that perhaps your own country isn't the good guy as it's rampaging around the world, participating in the war on terror. Difficult place to be, but nevertheless, people take solace when they arrive in Camp 2, because they find lots and lots of people there already who seem to be on the same page as them. Lots of people who are openly critical of existing power structures, and they think, hallelujah, I've found my tribe. This is great. We're all in it together. Let's stick it to the man. And what they don't realize is that Camp 2 has been heavily infiltrated by state and other actors. It's full of bad actors. It's full of grifters. It's a very, very deceptive place to be. And the reason for this is to prevent getting to the truth. And Camp 3 really is all about precisely that, getting to the truth. And in order to get to Camp 3, not only do you have to leave Camp 1, which is a difficult and painful process, but you also have to leave Camp 2, which again is a difficult and painful process. And by the time you get there, you find that Camp 3 is a very lonely, isolated, and difficult place to be, because not only do you have Camp 1 arrayed against you, you have most of these kind of bad actors in Camp 2 also arrayed against you. So we live in a world that is unfortunately drowning in deceit, and simply trying to get to the truth proves to be really, really hard. But nevertheless, that's what I have devoted my entire life to, and I'm not about to stop now.
That's a very good way of describing it. But anyway, so this is a framework that you have crafted, and I thought it was a genius way of describing what kind of information warfare we are in the midst of. And yet there's people who criticize this framework. And of course, the main critique or the main backlash at this point seems to be coming from Jerm Warfare. It's actually Jeremy Nell who is behind this podcast or behind this media. He's also a writer of UK column for a long time, a writer for UK column. And the points of critique is that first of all, there's several points. It's not an original idea that you are attempting to copy an old framework. Also, there's sort of whataboutism about you and the trip that you made to Spain. It's criticized that there's it's a false track. Can I say the word trichotomy? Trichotomy. So that there's these three camps, but I mean there could be 4 or 5 or 100. Also that it is creating a division because everybody's becoming suspects of being in one or the other camp, and also that you are monopolizing the truth. So these, I think, is the major points. So maybe I want to start out by hear from you if this framework is a wolf in sheep's clothing, as it is presented by Jeremy Nell. It's not an original idea. He thinks that you have copied something from which is a very old idea, and he quotes Sun Tzu's famous principle that all warfare is based on deception. It's a concept that dates back to the mid-20th century, particularly in socialist thought led by figures like Hal Draper. It was originally defined as neither Washington nor Moscow, rejecting both Western capitalism and Soviet-style communism in favor of an independent socialist stance. I don't understand this. I don't see how it is a copy of what he is describing here, but maybe it makes more sense to you, maybe it doesn't, but do you understand what he's trying to say?
Well, I wrote a 4-part series in response to Nell's hit piece on me, and part 4 deals with what he had to say specifically. I mean, it's so bad. It's it's just full of howlers. So in response to the passage that you have read, where he's citing Hal Draper, this is ridiculous. The 3 camps of awareness as a framework to explain perception management. It has nothing to do with mid-20th century socialist politics or Cold War non-alignment. I mean, it's just a bogus criticism. I mean, one thing to say, I mean, I've never claimed that the 3 camps of awareness is a 100% original idea. In the 9/11 so-called truth movement, there were already similar ideas floating around about controlled opposition standing in the way of what really took down the Twin Towers and so on. David Icke has his concept of mainstream alternative media. In and of itself, it's not spectacularly original. What is original is the framework that I published in February called A Guide to Identifying Camp 2, because that is a very detailed and extensive framework, and it proposes multiple tactics for identifying who is Camp 1, who is Camp 2, and who is Camp 3. And this seems to have ruffled some feathers, and predictably, because to the extent that the framework is helpful and useful, then those in Camp 2 stand to be identified and called out by it. And so it comes as no surprise to me that ever since that piece has been out, I've basically faced a year of flak in 2026. And flak itself is one of the hallmarks of both Camp 1 and Camp 2. One of my key observations is that Camp 2 deploys many of the same propaganda tactics as Camp 1, precisely because it's all about perception and information management, and flak is one of those. And so in my guide to identifying Camp 2, it's 5,500 words long. I mentioned Jeremy Nell's name once, but he's made it all about him, me, as though it was some kind of attack all on him, which it clearly wasn't. And even when I did bring him up, it was in the context of a trend, also involving other commentators who, within the space of a few weeks in the autumn of 2025, had all taken paid trips to Russia or China, and then produced favorable content about their experiences. And I asked a very simple question: how is that differentiable from Chinese or Russian propaganda? You get this wonderful kind of image of Russia and China finding its way into Western alternative media. It was a question. And instead of answering it, Nell responded with this absurd hit piece, which is just absolutely riddled with flaws. And the reason for that, I think, probably has to do with the fact that not only did I mention him, I also mentioned UK column, and probably most importantly, I mentioned the name Marcel Janker, the German businessman who has been funding UK column, who has a very suspect record of sending money to people across the alt media, and who we know has very close ties with Jeremy Nell. And I get the feeling that this is information which Nell did not want to be exposed and did not want to be out there in the public domain. Hence, he's lashed out with this hit piece. And even before the hit piece, it was quite remarkable. It was only about a couple of weeks or so after I wrote this guide to identifying Camp 2 that I woke up on a Monday morning. I checked my inbox, and there was this volley of highly aggressive, hostile emails from Nell awaiting me. And they'd begun at 6:34 in the morning. So he's obviously like a man who's been kind of sent on a mission. It's the first thing he does, getting up at the start of the week, is to start, sending these kind of intimidatory, aggressive emails to me, to which I did not take kindly. And I told him, no, I'm not going to be coming on your show in 24 hours' time. If anything, it should be the other way around. You should come on my podcast and I should ask you a few questions, obviously with Janker in the back of my mind, but he refused that. He refuses at all times, really, to talk about Janker, apart from a single piece that the UK column did on the 13th of February. And
we'll
I
get
think
back to that because I have that piece of video which we're going to replay here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that his hit piece falls flat. And again, I mean, for anyone who wants the detail of it, read part 4 of my series, because I systematically go through everything that he said and debunk it. But more important than part 4, and the reason I put it at the end, is parts 1, 2, and 3, because there, Nell actually said, if there's anything that I've said or done, in relation to my trip to China that you have questions about, then say so. And so I have. I went back and I watched the videos that he produced from China, and they look like propaganda. He went on a trip which required a visa that would have been state approved by the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's in the company of Carl Czar, who multiple commentators down the years have suspected of being a CCP propagandist, despite the fact he has US citizenship. It was obvious from the beginning there was never going to be any critical content of China in those videos. And when you go through them, of course, there isn't any critical content of China. What actually happens is it's a really crude formula. Nell sits there and bashes the West. And then he lets Czar speak, and Czar basically parrots the CCP line on everything, with no pushback at all from Nell. So, I stand by my contention that this does look barely differentiable from Chinese propaganda. I've put a long set of evidence together in part 3, And that trip, again, looks to have been funded by Marcel Janker. So, who is this very powerful?
When you say looks to have been funded, what do you base that on?
Well, I base it on Nell's known ties to Janker. I base it on the fact that while they're out there, they mention, for example, Jenny in the office in Shanghai. Well, I'm told that one of Janker's office employees is Jenny Tan in Shanghai. It's also, I mean, that the scale of the trip. Nell says it's to participate in a documentary that Pepe Escobar is making on the Belt and Road Initiative. But at one point, he pans the camera, and you can see there's an entire convoy of large vehicles moving in this trip. They move from one side of China to the other. One part of the trip involves, going 11 hours across the desert. There's mention of, film crews, cameramen. You've got the drivers. This was a major, major operation. They mentioned multiple flights within China. Nell would have had a return flight from South Africa to pay for. In part one of his China series, you see him leaving the hotel. One of my subscribers has identified that hotel as being a 5-star hotel in Shanghai, based on the photograph of the lobby. A phenomenal amount of money would have gone into this project. It's not the kind of thing which just you or I in the independent media could have done. So a large amount of money was coming from somewhere. And of course, we know about Nell's historic ties to Janker from tweets that came out when TNT went under because of Janker. And there was a spat there between Mike Ryan and Jenny Squires and Jeremy Nell. So these links are known. And I put a series of questions to Jeremy Nell at the end of part 2, which is on Janker, asking him to clarify the nature of his relationship with Marcel Janker. What exactly is it? What has he received from Janker? Has he received any other paid trips? For example, has he been to Thailand, where Janker has a kind of luxury hotel chain? These questions need answering. And if so, if he has accepted money and/or gifts from Janker, what, if anything, is expected in return? Transparency is absolutely essential on questions like this, because when you have people in the independent media who are claiming that they're entirely reliant on subscriber support and donations, etc., then it doesn't sit well with me if they're also taking money from a supremely wealthy German businessman who's been splashing millions of euros all across the independent media. This needs to be looked at quite carefully. And in part 2, when I'm discussing Janker, I've been in touch with Whitney Webb. He sent money to her. She asked, "Who are you? What's it for?" And then he stopped bothering her. So it wasn't genuine support. He sent money to Ian Davis, and it took a while for Davis to notice this because the amounts were £100 a month. Not something that stands out. We know that he is responsible for TNT going under, based on particularly what Mike Ryan has had to say. We know that he is responsible for Oval Media Berlin going under, based on what Robert Sibis has had to say. He's been involved with so many people. It's absolutely astounding. And again, who would have known? He funds the Rising Tide Foundation, which is Matthew Eric Kump and Christine Corey. He is the executive producer on Andrew Wakefield's Protocol 7. He sent a couple of $1,000s to Derek Bros for Pyramid of Power. Again, that's not to say that imply any wrongdoing on Bros's part at all, but it just shows this guy is spraying money all over the place. He offered to buy my son's power chair outright last summer when I ran a crowdfunder for it. I mean, that would have been £4,000 in one go, and I declined because the public had been incredibly generous and already paid for it. Havoye Morich, he wanted to help him register his business as a podcast. And to quote Morich, he says, "I also wondered if Janker might gain control over geopolitics and empire through equity in the business formalization process had I agreed to his terms. So, this guy is absolutely everywhere. And so it's legitimate to ask, well, what is his game? Why is he doing this? Is it genuine support, or is it to achieve influence? And in that regard, of course, we know that he acquired a 20% stake in UK Column in December 2024. And we know that £250,000 long-term liability appeared on the UK Column balance sheet at the same time. So again, it seems like, as with Oval Media, he sent a large amount of money here to UK Column. So does he exert editorial control? What exactly is his influence there? What's going on? It raises questions about China, because Janke has 8 companies registered in Hong Kong, not just one, 8. He's a very powerful player. The UK Column team was recently invited out there to China. And there was a very damning interview published about 12 hours ago involving 2 UK Column ex-employees, Debbie Evans and Sandy Adams. And the revelations in there are just jaw-dropping, really. And they talk about many things, but the China link is one of them. Sandy Adams claims that UK Column refused to show the Oracle Films film The Agenda, which both she and I were in. And the reason for that, apparently, allegedly, given by Mike Robinson, is that there was criticism of Chinese social credit scoring towards the end. And according to Mike Robinson, apparently, there's no such thing as Chinese social credit scoring, if Sandy Adams is to be believed.
No such thing at all. Doesn't exist. Is that what he's suggesting?
That's what Sandy Adams claims that Mike Robinson said. Okay, but whatever. The fact is that the UK Column did not help to premiere or promote that important film. We know that much. And the reasons, according to Sandy Adams, have to do with China. Anyway, I won't say too much more about that, but there are lots of obvious kind of Chinese links appearing. And I mentioned Carl Czar, who in my work, I cite at least 3 different people who in the past 6 years have suspected that Czar is a CCP propagandist. Well, Czar did an interview with Janke in 2023, so we know that the two have ties. And as I say, Janke acquired his stake in UK Column in December 2024, and Carl Czar appears on the UK Column scene, I think, in January 2025, and Nell not long afterwards, as just after Debbie Evans has been let go. So, this is a whole network that we're looking at here. This is, use of money to acquire influence. It would seem to change organizational structures and personnel. And this kind of Janke network has been very, very extensive in terms of who he's been trying to send money to. And you absolutely have to question his motives. So, the UK Column team, of course, have nothing but wonderful things to say about him. Jeremy Nell says that Janke, quote, just wants a better future for his kids and our kids, and that only a good person would fund the legal costs of Sucharit Bhakti and Matt Campbell, as Janke did. There's 2 more pieces of evidence of whom Janke has been funding. Mike Robinson says, I just enjoy Janke's company. He's a fantastic bloke. We're delighted to have him on board, etc. So, that's one side of the story. Perhaps Janke is this wonderful, benevolent individual who goes around investing in the alternative media for wholly good reasons. But on the other side of the ledger,
maybe you can hold the thought right there, David, because I have a clip, and I think that might be the clip you are taking those references from, and I want to play that clip. It's about a bit more than 5 minutes long, if that's
Sure.
okay with you.
Yep.
Jerm, we've had a few communications from people in the last couple of weeks asking about Marcel because of stuff that's going around on the internet at the moment. But look, I mean, he is German national originally. He set up a business in China to producing. Charles, I would guess we would describe it as traditional medicines.
Traditional Chinese medicine, yeah.
Yes,
plant-based medicines, yeah.
Right, so it's not
I mean, I've seen the medicines. It's not pharmaceutical at all.
No.
And he has done very well at that, and he has supported a lot of people, in particularly since COVID happened. He has supported a lot of people that have been speaking out against what's been going on in the world. And as I say, he's been a UK column member since around the COVID time, a little bit before maybe, and he has supported us a lot over that period of time, and I have to say he's one of the I just enjoy his company anytime we do meet up. He is a fantastic bloke, so we're delighted to have him on board, and he's extremely generous with his time and with his ideas and so on. But we've always got to keep in mind that the UK column is the UK column, and he has just want to reinforce this point. He has no desire to see us heading in any direction other than the one that we were intending to go in. So just to set everybody's mind at rest on that point.
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. I've known Marcel for many years. I mean, from when I was back at TNT, and you're quite correct. He just wants a better future for his kids and for our kids, and that's how it should be. We all should want a better future. I get so annoyed, Mike, at this constant bickering within the opposition, quote unquote, movement, and we've spoken about this before, but it's relevant because I constantly see even myself being accused of being controlled opposition and whatever else. Now, Mike, your degree of control over me is terrible. I have to admit, you've got to up your game. Look, I mean, I hosted a show where the guest argued that Earth is flat. You should have stopped that, Mike. And then Mike disappears.
And with that, he's gone.
Yeah, why has that happened? That's very annoying.
That's extremely impressive.
Well, I can still hear you, Mike.
Well done.
Hold on a second. Let me see what we can do here. Can I turn this off and turn this back on again?
You see, that's the level of control you have, Mike. You can't control your camera even.
Or that somebody has to be able to manipulate at every stage what's going on in the background. Is he there? He's there.
Yeah.
Look, I'm just gonna have to use the laptop camera. I'm not sure why that has happened. So
that's fine.
We'll just.
You were gonna say, Mike.
What was I going to say? You were asking about the sort of bickering within the opposition groups. Look, we have to always remember that we are in an information war, and at the end of the day, people are going to be influenced by a lot of the stuff which is pushed out on various formats and platforms. But we've been doing this for 20 years, Jerm, and in that time, the amount of stuff that has appeared on the internet about us, which has been absolutely factually incorrect, possibly defamatory in many cases. So I take everything that I see about anybody with a massive pinch of salt. Now, Marcel has supported a lot of people over the last 5 or 6 years in particular, and some of those people, for whatever reason, that relationship is broken down, and as a result, there is the usual vitriol doing the rounds about him from one or two people. But I look at this from the point of view that the number of people that are massively appreciative of the help that he has given over the years vastly outweighs the number of people that are complaining about him. And that applies, I think, to us and to just about everybody else that's doing this in any kind of honest way. So our view has always been that, bearing in mind that we have been on the receiving end of this kind of nonsense for so many years and so many instances of it, that we absolutely will not get involved in that kind of effort. Because what is the point at the end of the day, whether somebody that's an opposition or who claims to be resisting the agenda is attacking us or not? We're not the enemy, because we're not pursuing these agenda items that are the ones that are intended to enslave us, or whatever it is that people are particularly concerned about at this moment in time. So our effort should be directed at the policymakers, at the governments, at the financiers that are building this technocracy that we're seeing at the moment, and are using war as a mechanism to drive public support for the direction they're going in. So why would we focus any attention on any of the people that are really not relevant to this discussion?
Yeah, but that's the point. And I mean, going back to Marcel, I mean, a lot of people don't know. You were talking about how he's helped numerous individuals over the years. I mean, Sukhrit Bhakti was one of my very first interviews ever. And I think that was back in 2020. And he was heavily attacked by the German government, particularly. In fact, you might remember they wanted to take him down. And they took him legal, and they wanted to absolutely destroy him. And who was there to help Sukhrit? It was Marcel. I mean, only a good person would do that.
Yeah, we're back, David. So this is Jerm, and I think it's called Charles and Mike. Mike, the guy who is speaking the most with the Irish, I think Northern Irish accent. So this is a response to the attention that they are involved with Marcel Janke, and it's not the only response that they have had. I think you have also heard from another side some response, but it's a very limited response to what you're describing. Is a person who I think resides even in Hong Kong, has companies that works out of Hong Kong, several companies, and is spreading his investments in this alternative media field, and the other track record that you were mentioning. So you told me that there is some other comments from UK column on the connection to Marcel Janke, besides this interview, or this rant, a banter, as they weekly banter, as they call it.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Robinson sent an email to select UK column members, not all of them, adding some further thoughts on Janke and their gratitude to him for funding business development and so on. But I mean, to be honest, UK column isn't particularly my concern. It never has been. What they do is their business. My concern is the broader problem of infiltration of the independent media, because it ceases to be independent once it has become infiltrated. So just to respond to a few of the points that were made in that short segment that you played, Charles Mallett claimed that Janke has a company, singular, that produces, quote, traditional plant-based medicines, to which Nell chimes in, definitely not pharmaceutical. Well, that's interesting. Whitney Webb forwarded me an email from Janke's assistant, Liz Wen, who described Janke as owning a business in the pharmaceutical industry. So his own assistant describes it as pharmaceuticals. And again, it's not just a business. It's not like he's some kind of quaint, wonderful kind of herbalist or something. This guy's a massive player. He's got 8 companies headquartered in Hong Kong alone. I don't know if he's got any others, but this spans kind of cybersecurity, hotels, YMS Market Access Limited, which appears this is the one that got involved with UK Column, among other things. In healthcare, he is a major player. So they're trying to kind of downplay the scale of his power and influence, I think, in that section. Mike Robertson there said, quote, "He has no desire to see us heading in any direction other than the one we were intending to go in." Really? So that implies that UK Column were already intending to take Carl Czar and Jeremy Nell on, and for a lot of the content to suddenly acquire this kind of pro-Chinese hue in 2025. I'm not sure I find that very believable. And then in terms of Janka being, quote, "a fantastic bloke and only a good person," end quote. I'm glad that they have a good relationship with him, but others certainly haven't done. So again, this is all out there in the public sphere. But if you take Mike Ryan, the former head of TNT Radio, he claims that TNT Radio was, quote, "disassembled behind the scenes like a slow motion nuclear bomb." And this seems to have been quite a traumatic experience for him and Jenny Squires. Or if you take what Robert Sibis has had to say, the director of Oval Media, so Janka gave 500,000 up to 600,000 euros to help, ostensibly to help produce a kind of anti-COVID documentary. He then chucked in another 300,000 euro loan for equipment purchase. And then about 6 months later, demanded a kind of debt for equity arrangement whereby he wanted a controlling stake in Oval Media, or else he'd pull the money. And when Sibis said no, not fair, that's not what we agreed, he did indeed try pulling the money, and by which stage Sibis had, was working on lots of projects, having invested this money accordingly, and it degenerated into lawfare. And because of the amounts involved in Germany, what you pay in legal costs is proportionate to the disputed amount. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands euros every time. And it ended up with Oval Media Berlin filing for insolvency. So this was not an action of someone who was genuinely supporting this kind of anti-COVID documentary. Indeed, as part of the legal proceedings, Janka ended up with the rights to the first 4 parts out of 6 of the documentary series that Sibis produced. And instead of heavily promoting and marketing it and releasing it as soon as possible, as one would expect from someone who's kind of genuinely anti-system, he black shelved it and made sure it didn't come out for at least another year. And even when it did, he didn't promote it. So again, this has had a very traumatic impact on Sibis, who claims also that Janka engaged in kind of smears and reputational damage. And in one sense, we don't actually have to take Sibis at his word for some of this, because he's also published now 2 Telegram messages that Janka sent him while these legal proceedings were going on in July and August of 2023. And I mean, I need to read them out just to get a flavor of this, because it's very different from the fantastic bloke, only a good person vibe. So from the first one, just to read out a part of it, quote, "Once this is over, you will be my first customer to visit or be visited. You deserve it. And if you have any piece of self-respect, you know that. I will pay you cheating piece of," I'll substitute the word excrement, "back for what you did. but I will not weaken this fight, and you are not our priority. Just a weak asshole playing intellectual hero with stolen money. See you one day, haha. I will not forget your betrayal and robbery. We will handle it in time. I mean, this is it's very aggressive and unpleasant and threatening. And then the second message reads, and again, I'm going to substitute milder language in here. You effing idiot, think you play a game, now we play a game. It is really a pity, as your content was high quality, but you are such an ego-soaked idiot of a teacher, son, that we need to F you back a little, ha. We will find you, effer. You will pay for your absolute criminal robbery, boy. Exclamation mark, end quote. So, I mean, this puts a whole different side to this character, who we now know was responsible for the destruction of two major independent media outlets. And I have been in conversation with another very well-known person in the independent media who wishes to remain anonymous, who was offered money by Janka and turned it down when the contract presented contained all kinds of clauses that hadn't been discussed and were in Janka's interest. And at the point he did, allegedly, Janka had one of his minions start spreading malicious gossip about him to his own wife. This is the kind of thing that I've heard. So I'm pretty worried, really, about all of this. I feel like I got off lightly turning down this man's money. And again, why is he trying to invest across so much of the alt media? I mean, I've only mentioned the Anglophone alt media, but Sibis in Germany claims that there's over a dozen Germans in the alt media who've taken substantial amounts of money from Janka. So money buys control, of course. And if you play ball, I'm sure that he's very friendly. If you don't question China, I'm sure everything is fine. But if you do, he can put you out of business. And that's happened to TNT. It's happened to Oval Media. So, I think there's something very dark going on.
It's quite remarkable. After I read your articles on this, I saw a post. Well, I've actually had a few exchanges with Jeremy Nell or Jerm from Jerm Warfare, and I just want to share the screen here to see. It's a Substack post.
Right. So firstly, I mean, that first post there is ridiculous. There's no one in China downloads my podcast. This is how you know I'm secretly paid by Xi. Well, the point is not that Chinese people are listening to him. The point is that Westerners are listening to his podcasts, and this kind of messaging about China is going in. So, that's ridiculous.
Let me see. So, yeah. So here he's saying, I often hear that I'm a CCP shill backing China. That's absolutely nobody in China downloads my podcast. Is how you know I'm secretly paid by Xi. And then there's a picture of where his podcast is being downloaded. So I engage in a conversation because I don't think that actually tells anything. And during this engagement, he used very bad language on me, which I thought was a little bit going over the top. But what I want to show you here is now we're talking about Janka Marcel here. You can see that I ask Jerm if you don't mind letting me know if you have any affiliations with Janka Marcel, and in such case what these affiliations are, then I'd appreciate it. And then he answers with questions like this: make me realize you are a shitty person who cares only about your own ego and power games. Come to Africa, get shot or raped, and then let's talk. Quite a tough remark.
Yeah, I mean, one common theme, you know, in his aggressive emails to me, he didn't mention Janka, even though I'm sure that's the trigger of the emails. In his hit piece, long hit piece, he didn't mention Janka. I've explicitly asked questions now in public about asking him to clarify the nature of his relationship with Janka. As far as I'm aware, he hasn't. You've there asked him the same. He dodges every time. Why is that?
That's a good question. So let's get back to the points of critique that Jeremy has raised on you and your framework, three camps of awareness framework. He points out in even more recent, I think this is only a couple of days old. This is from May the 19th. It's a repeat of an old article. He writes, "Did you know that Jeffrey Tucker is the founder and president of the Brownstone Institute, who paid for David's trip to Spain?" That's your trip to Spain, he mentions. "And did you know that Jeffrey works for Epoch Times as their senior economics columnist? And did you know that the Epoch Times is funded by heavily anti-China interests like alien cult Falun Gong? And did you know that Mark Palmer, co-founder of the National Endowment for Democracy, NED, and vice chairman of Freedom House, an organization funded entirely by the US government, has funded both Epoch Times and Falun Gong? And did you know that the NED is connected to George Soros, whose Open Society Foundation in China was shut down in 1989 for its involvement in attempting to create CIA-backed political instability?" And he writes, "The double standard is breathtaking." So he's pointing out that you did get a paid trip to Spain and reported apparently favorably on Spain. Has that got any grounds, David?
No, I mean, it's a ludicrous comparison. It makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, I myself, in my guide to Camp 2, mentioned that I'd been to Spain, funded by the Brownstone Institute, and that while I was there, I didn't see anything amiss, you know, with what I saw within the Brownstone ranks. Now, that's a very different proposition from taking a trip. You know, I wasn't from taking a trip to Russia or China. You know, I wasn't required to get a visa. I wasn't there to do journalism. I didn't issue any reports from Spain. I didn't say anything about Spain. How is I haven't been on a campaign ever since to defend Spanish interests. So it's a ludicrous comparison. So he there is trying to say, well, you know, Brownstone, Jeffrey Tucker, Falun Gong, NED or whatever it was, you know, look how easy it would be to insinuate that Dave is some kind of, you know, Western shill or whatever. It's absolute nonsense, isn't it? Because there's no evidence of that whatsoever, because it isn't true. Whereas what I have provided is very extensive evidence now of the fact that his China videos are essentially pro-CCP propaganda, and of the fact that he is associated with Marcel Janka, and of the fact that if you're going to go to China, of course you're not going to be critical of the regime. So the comparison doesn't hold in any way, shape or form. It's absolutely trite. But unfortunately, that kind of is the standard of his hit piece.
He also raises the critique that it's a false trichotomy. You have to say that word.
Trichotomy.
Trichotomy. Because it's spelled out into three different camps. I'm not sure I understand the critique he's raising, but maybe you can answer.
Let's see. He writes, by dividing humanity into three neat camps, he, Hughes, creates exactly the kind of false dichotomy he criticizes in others. People don't fit into tidy categories. Some might be genuinely skeptical about certain official narratives while accepting others. They might be partially correct about some issues while completely wrong about others. They might evolve their thinking over time, moving between different levels of awareness on different topics. And of course, he's correct in that. He's absolutely right. The problem is that his critique relies on the reader not having read what I actually wrote. And so I've got an entire section in my guide to identifying Camp 2 called Between Camps. And there I write the following. Quote, the distinction between the three camps is not intended to be hard and fast. Individuals can move backwards and forwards between camps depending on circumstance. For example, they may set foot in Camp 3 only to find that it is too uncomfortable and then retreat back to Camps 1 and 2. Or they might reach Camp 3 on some issues but not others. The pandemic, say, but not climate change. Or people may feel on the cusp between camps depending on how far along their journey they are. They might value the work of those in Camp 3, for instance, but also still feel attached to certain commentators in Camp 2 whom they have not yet seen through. So, in other words, he's constructing a straw man here. He's claiming that I'd written something that I hadn't. In fact, I'd already written basically exactly what he's accusing me of not writing. And he does this multiple times, essentially taking what I have written and kind of twisting it back against me. So for another example, he says, quote, and why 3 camps? Why not 5 or 100 or 547, end quote. But again, if you actually read what I wrote, I had pointed there to, quote, the need for open-mindedness to the possibility of there being more than 3 camps of awareness. So it's profoundly dishonest the way he's constructing his argument here. And he does this over and over and over. And again, it's so bad that, I left this to the end because it's dismissing this stuff is so easy. But
the last point of backlashing here is monopolizing the truth. And I quote here from Jeremy. Perhaps most unsettling is the implicit claim to be the sole arbiter of authentic truth-seeking by positioning himself, and that's you, David Hughes, as the enlightened observer who can identify the real truth-seekers from the controlled opposition. David assumes a position of ultimate authority that should make any critical thinker deeply uncomfortable. He presents his framework as objective analysis, but is actually a highly subjective interpretation that conveniently places him and those who agree with him in the virtuous Camp 3, whilst casting doubt on pretty much everyone else. That is precisely the kind of monopolization of truth that characterizes cult-like thinking. So the very act of creating this framework serves to position David as a gatekeeper of authentic resistance, exactly the role he accuses others of playing. He becomes the ultimate insider who can reveal which outsiders are really insiders in disguise.
Which again is a gigantic misrepresentation of what I actually wrote. What I actually wrote was the following, quote, although certain names are named, the aim is not to produce a list of whom to trust and whom not to trust. I may have got it wrong in some cases. You should not rely on my judgment, end quote. So much then for positioning myself as an quote unquote ultimate authority who alone determines who the real insiders are. Why does Nell insist on twisting my every word?
Yeah. And this is probably not the last word in this case, as I think, and that's why I'm doing this interview with you, David. I think people should know these things. I think people should be able to read more books and read more articles, and particularly when it's well written and well-founded arguments. Instead, I think that a lot of people just rely on social media, rely on shorter videos for information, videos that will be, as we've seen, astroturfed, that is being propped artificially up instead of going into the nitty-gritty details. This is where I find you very articulate, and the way that you have this academic training, you are able to present much better than I am, a large sum or a large amount of data in a readable way. And I really, really appreciate the work that you're doing, because we all need to shortcut somehow in this information warfare that we're in. There's so much information. The CIA and everyone else is flooding the zone, as they are calling it, with information, and makes it really difficult to sort the riff from the raff in this. And that's where I think that
just on that note, Flemming,
yeah.
In the clip that you played and in Nell's hit piece, there's this notion of dividing the opposition. And in my guide to Camp 2, I actually identify that phrase as a hallmark of Camp 2. That if you ask any critical questions, about Jeremy Nell or UK Column or anybody else, that you are, quote unquote, dividing the opposition. And this in and of itself is a direct challenge to the 3 camps of awareness framework, because it's essentially implying that there's only 2 camps. There's the bad Camp 1 and the good Camp 2. And, either you're with us or against us in Camp 2. And if you're against us, you're a bad actor. The whole point of the 3 camps of awareness framework is to show that it doesn't work like that, and that actually there are 3 camps, and that there are many in Camp 2 who are a big problem. And so it's profoundly disingenuous or naive to use this line about dividing the opposition. For example, you can go back to 2009 and a paper that Cass Sunstein and Adrian Vermeulen, 2 Harvard professors, wrote. This was in relation to the 9/11 so-called truth movement. And they called back in 2009 for, quote, government agents and their allies to enter chat rooms, online social networks, or even real space groups and attempt to undermine percolating conspiracy theories. I mean, that was on the cards, 17 years ago. And we know for a fact that there's been massive state infiltration of the alt media. So, of course, we should be suspicious. Why should we trust everybody in Camp 2? He talks a lot about controlled Nell, that is, talks a lot about controlled opposition. Should we be building bridges with the so-called controlled opposition then? Because he talks a lot about the need to build bridges and unity and so on. What about all the dishonest grifters? We know that there's an awful lot of those out there. Should we be building bridges with people like those as well? What about people who are pushing propaganda while dressing it up as truth-seeking? Should we be building bridges with them, or should we be calling them out for what we are doing? So in other words, if you're serious about getting to the truth, the very last thing you want to be doing is kind of trying to shelter underneath a kind of umbrella of fake unity, because it doesn't exist. We should be critical of everybody. We should be asking critical questions about everything. We shouldn't just be saying, side with us and stick it to the man. There's something really suspicious, I think, about that mode of argumentation.
And it is a natural human mechanism, and I know it from myself, because I have seen the articles that you have put out, and I have seen the critique that they have raised as well, or the backlash they had raised. And at some point, I was going, "Oh, here we go again," and it's so, yeah, it is so demoralizing to see people that you think actually are doing a good job, and now they are arguing, and there's a division, and the energy could be put somewhere else. So actually, I did consult with one of my good friends, Claire, when you came out with this about Jeremy Nell, and then there's just, I mean, you just need to dive into it. If you are engaging in a discussion like that, you need to know the riff from the raff. You need to know what is right and what is just something that is being posed and is not really based on evidence. And you are fantastic in doing that, David, and I hope you will keep on going, and I hope you won't get too much backlash and too much and be too demoralized.
I mean, as I say, I do intend to draw a line under this kind of work pretty soon, because I mean it's draining and it does distract from bigger things. When you say that I kind of came out with this stuff against Nell, let's just be clear here. I hadn't attacked Nell at all. I asked one question in relation to pay trips abroad. He instigated this. Okay, he's the one that put a hit piece out on me and sent aggressive emails.
Please
to me.
talk us through. Please talk us through, David, how this actually started, because that's interesting to know that as well. How did this discussion between you and Nell start?
Well, I think I mentioned it earlier, but it was it was on early on a Monday morning at the start of March, I think, when I got these aggressive emails from him, I declined to come onto his podcast. I didn't say anything about it in public. And then the next thing I know, a couple of weeks later, there's a hit piece against me. So, there was obviously a kind of premeditated agenda on his part from the beginning. All of this makes you wonder again, about the kind of networks in play that you don't necessarily see. I'm told, I've not actually checked, but I'm told that, so, I mean, the order of it was I produced my guide to identifying Camp 2, and then Nell obviously was told to, start these attacks on me, and then I started the work on Fuellmich, and apparently Mike Robinson said on air, or at least I'm told, that this is dangerous and it's dividing the opposition and so on to criticise Reiner Fuellmich. So that's kind of fascinating, because that ties the two things together. And then just last week, Brian Gerrish of UK Column was in Bremen interviewing Reiner Fuellmich. So isn't that interesting? That they're all kind of allying together now. It's really fascinating to watch this unfold. Kind of different alliance structures shifting. But it's helpful, I think, because it's crystallizing certain things. It crystallizes who's on what side and what exactly they're promoting.
Yes, and that's our 5 pence of thoughts on this. Thank you for taking the time to explain this, David.
Thanks, Fleming. It's always a pleasure.